Hey y'all, Hat Function here. I'm going to be doing a lot of talking to start the video, so if that's not your thing and you just want to watch the gameplay, if you want to watch the dumbest successful Abyssal God fight of all time, check the description for timestamps. So for the past couple months I've been streaming Etrian Odyssey 3. It's been a good time. Out of the first 3 games which I've played, it's definitely the most solid overall entry in the series so far. And as I tend to do, I have been making some extremely questionable decisions. One particularly long string of bad decisions led to me killing the Abyssal God in his defense form, which is absolutely not the intended way to win that fight. But, starting at the beginning, I noticed in my first playthrough that stun is a surprisingly effective ailment in this game. Nearly every boss has some degree of stun resistance, but only 2 enemies in the game are outright immune to stun. It's the Kraken and the King Penguin. For some reason. In addition, unlike with other ailments, enemies don't accumulate stun resistance, so you can stun enemies as many times as you want per fight, and suffer no penalty. Of course, this gave me a terrible idea. And going into New Game Plus, I had built a Stunlock team. Now, the team I built completely flies in the face of conventional strategy. It has no tank, no damage reduction, and no healing. Only one team member actually has a useful offensive skill, and that was unintentional. The only strategy this team has is to hold down the A button and pray. It's a gimmick, it's a one-trick pony, whatever you want to call it, this team is 100% meme. The team's composition is simple. 4 of the units are Shoguns with a Gladiator subclass. These are pretty straightforward. They take 1 skill from each class. From the Shogun, they take Second Sword, which allows us to equip 2 swords and do 2 regular attacks per turn. The Gladiator subclass makes those regular attacks scary with the skill Stun Attacks, which adds a 55% base stun chance to each regular attack. Simple, powerful combination. And together it gives the highest average stun chance for any single unit in the game. There are other ways you can try and build a stun locking team, but this is by far the most effective. Now, that's the first 4 units. The 5th unit is actually a ninja with a Shogun subclass, and is a bit more complicated. My intention was for her to equip the Stunning Knife, which is a pretty self-explanatory weapon. It has built-in stun enchantments, the maximum possible in the game. But she was going to equip the Stunning Knife, create a Shadow Clone, and use Warrior Might to do follow-up hits on every regular attack with the Stunning Knife. So 4 Shoguns with 2 weapons would be 8 regular attacks per turn, and 2 follow-ups for each of those hits would give 16 Stunning Knife hits per turn. Now, as funny as that strategy was, especially since the Stunning Knife does bare minimum physical damage with every hit for 16 hits a turn, it turns out that Warrior Might is specifically programmed so it can't stun enemies, at least in my experience. It can trigger other forged weapon attributes, so if you forge an elemental attribute onto a weapon, your Warrior Might attacks will have that elemental damage added on. If you forge other status effects, Warrior Might does trigger those status effects, but stun, for some reason, is just a no-go. The Stunning Knife also, something they don't tell you about, has 50% base accuracy, so that, overall, it just wasn't a great strategy. So in the end, I gave the ninja a real weapon, and instead of contributing to the stun lock, she just does actual damage. With a real weapon, Warrior Might triples the damage output of our team, and that means that fights actually end in a reasonable amount of time, and we don't have to stun lock our enemies for like an hour. Now that's the meme team in a nutshell. Now I said that coming up with this team was a terrible idea, and none of that has sounded terrible so far, but of course the devil's in the details. Boils down to 2 things, the availability and the reliability. the big problem with the Stunlock team is that you can't get it until post-game, at which point there's very few things left to use it on, and it takes an absurd amount of grinding to get. Every single unit uses the Shogun quest, which isn't available unless you take the Arm Road route, and even then not until the 4th stratum. And then if you want your team to be effective, you need to do a ton of grinding. You'll notice that we are equipped with Dragon Banes that are fully forged with stun enchantments. You want to have weapons with as many stun enchantments as possible, and these are only available from post-game foes and superbosses. Fully forging one of these Dragon Banes requires you to kill all 3 elemental dragons, 9 times each. Yes, I actually did this. Yes, it took forever. On top of that, you'll notice that our luck stat is kind of abnormally high. Shoguns, normally when you max their level, have less than 50 luck. And this is a problem if you're trying to inflict ailments, because your luck and tech stats matter a lot for ailment infliction. Thankfully, you can grind stat boosters in this game, but the materials you need to do it, or the skill you need to do it, aren't freely available until the post-game. And it still takes forever to finish. I dropped 36 luck books on every single one of these units. And the thing is, you need to maximize your stun chance. You can't cut corners, at least not many. And that's really the second issue with this team, is it doesn't actually work. It's not reliable. It does great against regular enemies, it does great against FOEs, it does great against most bosses. When you get to the post-game and you start fighting super bosses, it completely falls apart. Most super bosses have a 10% stun chance modifier, which, at the end of the day when you run all the calculations, the maximum stun chance you reach against them, using a team of 5 Shogun Gladiators, dual-wielding fully forged Dragon Banes, the chance per turn of stun is 85%. If you skip out on the forges, it drops to 71, and if you don't grind up your stats, that actually drops your chance of stunning with each hit by half. So you really need the forged weapons and the stat boosters just to hit 85%. My team doesn't even have all of that, so against super bosses, our chance to stun per turn is pretty close to exactly 75%. Which is... 75% is decent, but it's not great. Fights in Eternasi last a while. And bosses really only need 1 or 2 free turns to just end you outright, especially if you are running a team that has no damage reduction, and no tank, and no healing. We have a couple of emergency backup strategies, and we have managed to make it work against the super bosses so far. But if you actually want to fight them properly, there are so many more effective strategies in this game than stun locking. I am doing this entirely because I thought it was funny, not because it's actually effective. But speaking of the super bosses, this video is about the Abyssal God, the final super boss of the game. Its main gimmick is that in its second phase, it switches between a defense form and an offense form. The first switch happens after 5 turns. As you deplete its health, it flip-flops back and forth in more and more chaotic ways until everything is terrible, and you're basically playing a slot machine. But the intended way to do this fight is to hold back when it's in defense mode and to do all of your damage when it's in offense mode, as you'd expect from that kind of boss fight. Doing things the intended way is fine, but you can probably tell by now, I really like making bad decisions. I like doing things the way you're not supposed to. That said, with the Abyssal God, trying to kill it in defense form is easier said than done. I'm actually not sure if it's even possible to deal that much damage in the first 5 turns. I don't think it is. But when I was fighting it with my regular team, I did discover that if you deny the Abyssal God's turn, if it's unable to take its turn for some reason, it will not change phase. The easiest way to do this, of course, is to immobilize it with an ailment, like sleep, or paralyze, or stun? And so that's the realization that led to my next really terrible idea. By stunlocking the Abyssal God, you can keep it trapped in defense form for the entire fight, without ever seeing it switch to offense mode. Now, of course, once again, easier said than done. The defense form, of course, takes like a quarter of the damage of the offense form, and so my team deals less than 1,000 damage per turn when the Abyssal God is in defense mode. The Abyssal God has 60,000 HP, so with a 75% chance per turn of stunning it, the chance of successfully stunning it for 60 turns in a row is about 1 in 31 million. On top of that, after turn 40, the Abyssal God enters a rage mode, gets mad at you for wasting its time, and, among other things, one of its attacks gains turn priority, meaning that it has a 1 in 6 chance to just change forms and kill one of your units before you can even act. So in order to avoid this attack, and get 60 turns of stuns in the row, you would need the most godlike luck in the world. Fortunately, luck doesn't have to be a factor if we don't want it to be. In the DS Entry and Odyssey games, manipulating the battle RNG is not only possible, it's actually pretty easy. I will demonstrate this using one of the most common exploits, the Scylla manip. So whenever you reset the game, the battle RNG resets to the same fixed value, and it only advances when you're in a battle and you take an action. If I pick this sequest, I put one party member in the first slot, and we start the fight. And then try to escape. Our friend Glaucus here will summon a tiger that just instantly kills the Scylla, and that's a free win. This works every time you reset, no matter what unit you use, and it's one of the fastest ways in the game to level grind. So if we put it all together, the stun team, the Abyssal God, RNG manipulation, by trial and error we can find a sequence of actions that guarantees that we stunlock the Abyssal God to death without ever seeing it enter offense mode. And the end result of that trial and error process is what I'm showing off here today. I realize I probably could have just said that instead of completely nerding out for several minutes, but I put a lot of effort into this completely pointless task, and I wanted people to appreciate that. Anyways, here's the gameplay. Hope you enjoy it.